we're supposed to follow God's orders, but one of those orders would seem to be godlike. Or specifically, we're supposed to be Obdei Hashem, listen to what God tells us to do, and what He tells us to do is to be a decision maker, right? In other words, He wants you to make decisions, which is contrary to the very concept of what servitude is. And I point this out, like Ramosha says, there's the aspect of the mind, in the sense where Moshe said, if God wanted to tell you nice and easily what to do, He could have written it another way. The way He wrote the Torah and the way He gave Torah Shabbat, it's like, all you did was give it over in such a way that makes human beings have to think to try and figure out what you want us to do. Right? You couldn't say it nicely, you couldn't say it straight. He says that was intentional. The Rambam says, try to emulate God, develop certain values and emotions. That also fosters you in terms of becoming a decision maker, because you start developing the concepts. And then there's the concept of chovas levavos in terms of developing obligations in your heart. There's chovas levavos, which means you have to develop certain emotions and so forth. So the truth is it's a paradox. I'm ordering you to be a decision maker. Well, following orders is not to be a decision maker. Okay. It's a little problem. The Meforshim who basically point out that this really was the paradox of Adam and Chava. Okay? That the real paradox of Adam and Chava is that Chava understood that her job was to become godlike. That's what she understood her function to be. Kipshua ta'aretz, to conquer the world, to take dominion over the world. There was this constant idea that you were supposed to take dominion over this, and therefore, when the Nachash said to her, right, that you do this for Ita Kalakim, Nachash wasn't lying. Before she put it, Nachash was saying, the truth. And what happened was that was Chava's paradox. He says, I don't get this. Okay, my whole being is to try and emulate the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and here you're telling me, don't do this. It's problematic. That is the paradox that we seem to have confronted. Okay? Now, this paradox seems now to become more intensified, because in reality Chava did eat of the Eitzadas, and she gained knowledge of Tov and Ra, of the ability to distinguish between Tov and Ra, which makes her more like an Elohim, according to what Nachash says. The fact is that you see that at a certain level, Chava has this understanding of Tov and Ra, and that's why she develops into a concept of sneas. There seems to be something where she has developed something that has some knowledge. There's some aspect of a knowledge here that she gains between what is right and what is not right. Now, there are two issues involved with that. One is what is this Tov and Ra that she's talking about, which we'll talk in a second. But right off the bat, there's an interesting problem about Chava developing knowledge of good and evil, which seems to imply that the knowledge of good and evil is internal. We have the knowledge of good and evil, right? That would seem to support concepts such as the catechol imperative of Kant, would seem to support concepts of natural morality. Adam and Chava getting the Yedias Tov and Ra, right, implies that Yedias Tov and Ra is something that comes from inside of ourselves. If that's true, we have a major problem with Orthodox Judaism. What's the major problem? Where does Orthodoxy say knowledge of good and evil comes from? What do we know? What's right and what's wrong? From the Torah. So the truth is there's an interesting question here. Why did I need HaKadosh Baruch Hu to tell us what is good and what is good and evil, what's right and wrong, when supposedly we already have this Yedias Tov and Ra, this knowledge of good and evil? Now, on a certain level, you can sit there and say, well, part of good and evil is following HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? That what's good is listening to God, what's evil is not listening to God. Therefore, in the mix of knowing of what's good and evil, you have to have this perception of listening to God, because that in itself is a presentation of a good and evil. That really explains the chukim, right? There's certain things which don't seem to touch what we call the moral framework of good and evil, but the good and evil is totally defined by the fact that God said to do it. They're in a vacuum otherwise, and we confront that good is listening to God and evil is not listening to God, right? And that's the way the Rambam defines when he calls it chukim. Says a commandment not to eat pork has no reason. The reason you do is because God told you not to eat pork, and the challenge you have is that you're going to listen to God and not listen to God. So those type of mitzvahs we can understand. But what about Tov and Ra itself? What about Tov and Ra itself? Concepts of what I feel is justice, concepts of chesed, concepts of feelings that I have within myself, of morality. If I have knowledge of good and evil from within myself, what do I need God to voice His opinion in good and evil? Right? That really is what the question that we're getting to. If you believe there's no such thing as personal ethics, right? No knowledge within oneself, then you need God. That's why people talk in terms of this challenge actually gets into the whole issue of relativistic ethics that lives in our world today, which basically gets to a point that really we develop feelings of what's good and evil after we're told what's good and evil, but not that they come inherently with us. There's some kind of emotion that goes with it. Therefore, we need God to tell us what's good and evil, and then we will develop the emotions that go with it. Right? That seems to be an approach of many, many people, because otherwise we can't know what's good and evil. But the truth is that within Torah sources, there seems to be an idea that it's not just we develop emotions towards certain things, because the truth is, if it was just a matter of developing emotions, why would the Rambam have to make a distinction that the mitzvah of, let's say, do not commit murder, you're supposed to have that sense that this is immoral. But the mitzvah of don't eat pork, you're not supposed to have that sense. Because we already have a concept of this emotion that there's something wrong with committing murder. Right? That's why it says they're tied to mitzvah siflius. So the truth is by the fact that we distinguish between mitzvahs that we're supposed to have a moral response to and mitzvahs we don't have a moral response, it seems to me that there's something within us that has some kind of moral response. And that sometimes some mitzvahs we're supposed to integrate with that moral response. So the question is, so why does God speak to us?
Some of those are universal.
Right, and therefore then why would the Torah even speak about this? This is a classic question of a lot of people throughout the ages. That if we already know the issue of what's right and wrong, it really is problematic. Why would the Torah speak to it?
But if we know that murder is wrong, intrinsically, everybody in the world knows that murder is wrong, without having received the lufas.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that, in a black and white area we know that murder is wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we know in fine points how to define what murder is.
Right. That's the Rav's answer.
Killing.
That's the Rav's answer based on Sajiga. He says that we all know murder is wrong, but at the edges, abortion and euthanasia, how do we know? How do we know?
Self-defense.
So therefore, he says that you need the halacha to clarify the difficult points and the where it's problematic and so forth. My problem with that, to be honest with you, is that I always found it interesting because, like the Rav, let's say, specifically takes abortion, and he says, you see, pro-life, pro-choice, a whole issue like this, where does life begin, all these issues, and so forth and so forth. So therefore, you need God to clarify with stating over the halacha of what really is ritzicha, and so forth. Has anyone here ever learned the halachas of abortion, for example?
You know when I said Nishma that I'm reading now.
If God was trying to clarify the spectrum of opinion on abortion, I'm telling you, the job didn't clarify it so much. All that happens with the opinion on abortion is if you really take the spectrum of opinion on abortion across the board, it takes it in a little bit. The extreme pro-life is out the window, because extreme pro-life says that even if the mother's life is threatened, you can't abort. No, that's clear. The mother's life is threatened until the head or roll of the fetus is out. Her life is expendable. There cuts over there. On the other end, you cannot use abortion as a form of birth control, which, from my understanding, in Europe it really is. There are cases of people who come over here from Europe, right? But in Europe as well, they come over here and they're shocked. The women had 6-7 abortions. It's a form of birth control. That's the way it is. It's no big deal. These people. The point is that on that level, no, it is not. It should not be a form of birth control. That you can just abort because you just don't want to be pregnant. But within that spectrum, right, almost on any issues, there's a wide disagreement of opinions. So the point is, if we're trying to clarify it, the halacha, it clarified a little bit, but it doesn't really open up. So that was an issue to it. So it doesn't answer it. But the point is you see by the very fact this question is asked that it's somewhat of an issue. Why does the Torah speak to issues that we're already supposed to have some kind of internal feeling for? But behind that argument is a belief that internal feeling actually has value. That's called natural morality. There's a lot of questions on it, but for example, Rabbi Lichtenstein has a famous article on this issue, and he tries to argue that it's clear that the Torah values natural morality. Okay? He develops concepts like the Mashur Sadin is an aspect of natural morality. He argues, you see it from Stom, where Avram argues with God, and says, that obviously God had Avram had some perspective of justice. It was an aspect of natural morality, of justice, and he turned to God. Now, the truth is, I had questions, and my Rabbi also had problems with it. He says, who says Avram got it from natural morality? Maybe Avram got it from a Kodesh Baruch Hu. He learned about justice, and all of a sudden, he's learning for years from Kodesh Baruch Hu the idea of justice. He says, listen, I have a Shiloh, you've been telling me about this justice, this doesn't seem to be the idea of justice. So my Rabbi kind of does
it as a question, doesn't he?
Right, he has a question. Right.
So we weren't stuck to right.
Which tells you, that's right. And still, and by the way, you still see a little bit of an edge. An edge. Yes. I mean, it was respectful, but it was not. It was not like.
Moshe does the same way.
Yes, absolutely. Got a little angry with Moshe, but it's okay. But the fact is that that's a reality that we have this aspect where you but Rav Lichtenstein argues that this comes from our emotions. But the truth is that it's clear cut. You don't have to bring a proof from the story of Avram Avinu, from other aspects. It's a clear cut. There's a clear concept that brought down the Midrash Rabbah, stuff like it says Vayishita Hayasher V'Atov. You should do the commandments. You should do what's Yasher and what's Tov. Okay, and it says Hayasher Atov Beinei Shemayim, what's good, i.e. Tov Beinei Shemayim, Vayasher Beinei Adam, and what's Yasher Beinei Adam. We are concerned about the perception of us from the non-Jewish world. And if we're concerned about the perception of us from the non-Jewish world, then what does that say about our understanding of morality, of universal morality? Let me try and explain this. In our concern for how the non-Jewish world looks at us, there's a concept of B'nai Eva. We're concerned because of Eva. That's a concept that we don't want to upset the non-Jewish world around us because it can be harmful and detrimental to the Jewish world. Okay? So there's a concept of B'nai Eva where it's not because we're accepting any moral perspective out there. Okay, and by the way, I'm using this in a narrow sense right now. There's people who have different attitudes from Ibn Eva and time Ibn Eva to what I'm going to get to in terms of Chilul Hashem. Ibn Eva is from fear,
right?
From fear of retribution. So there is a concept that we don't want to upset the non-Jewish world because they might harm us, right? They might act negatively to us. However, there's another concept, and that's where we talk about Chilul Hashem. We don't want to look bad in the eyes of the non-Jewish world that our religion and our God is not perceived to be good. That's a very different concept. And you have specific halachas that state that certain things which may be permitted, we shouldn't do because of Chilul Hashem. Because the non-Jewish world will challenge our God as not being good. Actually, there's different understandings of Chilul Hashem. Either they might say they'll perceive us as not listening to our God because in other words, there's a different law for non-Jews and Jews, and we do something to non-Jews that they know is us or they know that Jews shouldn't do, but it only really applies to Jews, and non-Jews there's a terror not to do it. They might say, you see, the Jews, they don't even listen to their law because of the way they treat us. That's one understanding of Chilul Hashem. Another understanding of Chilul Hashem, which is a more dominant thing, that the non-Jews will look upon us as being immoral, which means that somehow the non-Jewish perception of morality is given value. Vasita hayosher b'nei adam. That universal perception is that we are supposed to meet some standard that is universal, that the whole world accepts, which means it doesn't just come from, in the eyes of non-Jews, though obviously it doesn't come from just the statement from Sinai. It comes from their own specific feelings of morality. Okay? Now, we try to do that. Does it work all the time? No, necessarily, but that is a value. Chilul Hashem. Listen, like for example, the non-Jews may look upon circumcision as barbaric. Okay, sorry, that's the way it works, right? This is an interesting question where actually some people actually deal with this, because there's a statement from Rashi quoting Gemara by Chukim, that the Chukim, the non-Jews will look at Chukim and think and challenge them as being ridiculous. What kind of nation does this stuff? And they'll mock the Jewish people for doing this. And there's an aspect that Satan encourages it, and so forth and so forth. Then we have a statement that the non-Jews will look at us and say, "Eza am chacham v'navon." What a wise and enlightened nation. So the fact is that before we deal with it, why is it people will see us following Torah? On one hand, they'll think of us as crazy off the bat. On the other hand, they'll think of us as being wise and perceptive and things like that. So there are proportion who deal with the stira between the statement of Rashi in Chukas and the statement of the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. But the point is that there is something where if the Torah specifically says something and non-Jews will look on it as barbaric, such as circumcision, we have to live with that. Obviously, that's not the only standard. But on the other hand, if we're able to do something in such a way that we get a feeling from them that we are a moral and wise nation, that's something we're supposed to look for, something we're supposed to be good. So Vasita Yashra Tov is not the only, Vasita Yashra B'nei Adam is not the only standard, it is a standard. But once it becomes a standard, it brings in the fact that our moral perceptions within ourselves actually must have value. So how is it that we have these two standards of Tov and Ra, it seems? We have the standard from Har Sinai, and we have the standard from the Eitzutas Tov and Ra. And that really forces this issue. So what we have to look at is two distinct models of understanding good and evil. Okay? there is a simplistic model of understanding good and evil which most people work on. And that is that there's an evil drive and there's a good drive. Little devil and the little angel. Right? I remember from your cartoons when you were children, the little angel on one side and the little devil on the other side telling you what to do. Right? There's a perception that there are good drives and bad drives. And you really see this develop in a lot of religions. It's not like Christianity has its 7 deadly sins. What are they? They are 7 drives, right? And you're not supposed to have these. Having these drives is a reflection of evil, right? So that understanding of good and evil comes from
having the drive is evil, or having no control over the drive.
Having no control, but basically the drive is a drive of evil. Okay? In other words, you take like the 7 deadly sins, they're all drives. Avarice, greed, right? Gluttony. What? Sloth. I don't know. I don't know the.
It's a great movie.
I don't know. Okay? It's the drive itself that's evil. Therefore, the holy person within those worlds, don't have this drive. That's why when a person wants to become a priest within Catholicism, yes, it takes rise of poverty because this is not supposed to be done. It drives of celibacy because the drive is inherently evil, right? And then you have this concept of necessary evil because there's a perception of the drives being evil and good. So therefore, you basically define things by the drives. And therefore, what is the battle of good and evil within that perspective? The battle of good and evil within that perspective becomes a battle between drives, right? Right? I want the chocolate cake. I got to keep to my diet. It's just a matter of willpower. Which one is going to overcome? Okay, that's one understanding of the battle of good and evil. There's another understanding of the battle of good and evil. To understand that, you have to understand what really is Tov and Ra. Okay, Tov and Ra are easily defined as good and evil. But if you really look at Meforshim, Tov and Ra have quite different connotations. Tov basically is understood to be unified. Right? Kosh Baruch Hu, why do we have 2 Ki Tovs on Tuesdays, Yom Shlishi? Because Kosh Baruch Hu didn't say Ki Tov on Monday. Why? Because what was created on Monday? The Rakia that separated. There was a separation, and if you look at it, the fact is that Tov has to be from unity. There's a morale in the Gurarya that talks about that Tov is basically an aspect of unity. Ra is ultimately a drive of disunity. This is the way the Ramchal understands the difference between the realm of the spiritual, which is the realm of oneness, and the realm of the physical, which basically brings about Ra. The oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is impossible for us to fathom, because we look at the world from a physical realm. Okay, oneness in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is something we can't understand. However, it becomes oneness. This is an example the Ramchal says in Das Funos. It says, we in this physical world are separated. We're broken down. For example, but in the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there is no separation. Example. If I hear something, how do I hear in this world? I hear through my ears, right? Okay? I don't hear through my stomach. The fact is that there's one body, there's one being, but the truth is I am divided. When a Kodesh Baruch Hu hears, his whole being hears. It's not the ear and it's not the eyes that see. It's the wholeness. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's beyond it. But that's what the Ramchal says. The essence of the world of Shemayim, the essence of the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is a world of total oneness, where the divisions that we have in our life, in our being, where different parts of our body do different things, and we do things through these different parts, the very essence of oneness is that everything is together. There's no separation. Separation is a reality of the physical. And therefore, when you look at the separation of the physical, it's not that the physical is inherently negative, like totally negative. It's not a bad drive. It's a fact that the physical is limited. I can see through my eyes, but I can't hear through my eyes. The eyes have a good thing to it. They can see, but they have a weakness. They can't hear. That is the essence of the challenge of the physical world. The physical world separates things, and that is the world of Ra. That's an aspect of Ra. It's everything is separate. So now, if you understand Tov Ra, it becomes an issue. Are you thinking of the wholeness of an issue when you challenge something, or are you thinking of the separateness of an issue when you're challenging something? Is a behavior going to reflect the wholeness as much as we can have wholeness in the world? That's Tov. Now, the behavior will still be specific. It will still be broken down. You know, there's times as a Tov you're eating, right? You're not doing something else, obviously. But the fact is behind this act, do you have a perception of the fullness and wholeness? That's Tov. An act that attempts to be as all-encompassing as possible. That's Tov. Ra is an act that is narrowly defined by only one drive. That it totally limits itself to this drive in itself. Now, therefore, we are actually made up of a variety of drives. And each one of the drives has a place. The same way as there's a time for the ear to hear, there's a time for the eyes to see, there's a time for the mouth to eat, there's a time for the mouth to speak. Okay, but we have to also know through another mechanism how we can bring it together that, hey, you're not eating at the same time as you're talking. Okay, that's not supposed to be good for people. And you're not listening at the same time that you're talking. You're supposed to listen, then talk, or talk and then listen. But the point is that there's a way of coming together. But the fact is that's a different understanding of the drives. The drives are constantly in challenge with each other. So one way of looking at it is an aspect of willpower. Which drive is going to win? Two boxers in the ring. Which drive is going to win? The good drive, the angel or the devil? There's another aspect of it. Both drives are in there. Okay? You have to determine which drive should take precedence in the conception of which is the one that has the aspect of totality, of unity, of oneness. That's a very different perspective of Tov and Ra. See, the fact is that built into Tov and Ra in terms of drives, there's also an aspect of it. We sort of have a feeling when a drive is good or bad, one that has a more lasting effect and stuff like that. If we're really hungry, we sort of know, hey, most likely for the benefit of the total body organism, it's good for us to eat. Because that drive has built up certain aspects of our drives that reflect that aspect. But the fact is, there's another aspect of Torah that brings our mind into it and determines what is Tov and Ra. Now, what I believe occurs is that in the Eitz Das Tov and Ra, what occurs is we develop these feelings, we develop these ideas, and we have emotions that make us recognize this, which recognizes aspects of our understanding of the moral forces themselves. But the Eitz Das Tov and Ra leaves us in the realm of these forces. Okay, what we need direction on Okay, the same way of knowing when to hear and when to speak is you need the development of the mind to be able to control the various aspects of these emotions and these values and these drives in order to determine what is the proper behavior in situations. Okay? And that's where Torah comes in. There's an aspect where we have an emotional, feelings of certain things in terms of drives and repercussions. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave through Torah is a system that we are to use our mind to help us develop the organization of these various drives. Okay, and that's a different level of Tov Ra. And that's what I'm going to finish up with next week in terms of understanding that how the Torah developed a further perspective from the basic feelings of Tov Ra. Okay, so that's where we're going to go next week.